You've been involved with British Bonsai for the best part of 60 years. I just wanted to ask, how long has bonsai been in the UK, and what can you tell us about it from before you were involved?
Well, I can't tell you too much. I believe it was bonsai were originally seen in one of the early exhibitions. I think Crystal Palace, I believe, and that goes right back to the turn of the century. And that's when I think there were some imported, on view, and that's I think when bonsai were first seen, to the best of my knowledge. But apart from that, I can't really tell you too much about bonsai before my time. There were a few people dotted around the country, one or two from Scotland, one or two from London. There was a London-based bonsai society known as Bonsai Kai, and they were a splinter group of the Japan Society of London, and I think their patron, that was Princess Chichibu of Japan, and I joined that society really because they had a magazine, a little booklet thing about things Japanese, and there were just 2 pages devoted to bonsai, and that was about it. Yeah.
And what year was it that you started?
Well, for me, I started back in. I got my interest in this country was back in 1967, 68, but didn't have my first trees until 69. But that's another story.
Okay. So around that time, when you got your first tree and when you started, who were the main players on the British bonsai scene? Do you have any early memories of them that you can share?
Yeah, there were a few. There were a couple of nurseries. Okay, there was Tokonoma, and there was Bushukan. There was Seiyukan, Siki, something like that. Anyway, there was also Price and Adams, which was Peter Adams's nursery, and he was the bright boy at that time, and the guy that really was my hero and actually taught me an awful lot. But other names that come to mind were people like Ruth Stafford Jones. You've got to understand most of these people are all deceased. Harry Tomlinson, Dave Joyce, there are 1 or 2 of the Londoners, there's Peter Chan. There are 1 or 2 from Scotland, although I'm sorry, but the names, I can't recall their names, but they were very much into it. And most of these people were actually members of the Bonsai Kai. But there's very, very, very little around at that time that I started. There were actually 1 or 2 societies. There was
was Craig Cousins one of those Scottish guys at that time? It's just a name I remember from my
Craig Cousins may have been, but I didn't know him at that stage.
In the early days, okay.
Yeah.
In those days, how would you guys actually sort of meet or hear about each other, share your information, and what resources were available to you?
Well, there were 1 or 2 societies, okay? There was the Bonsai Society of Great Britain, and they were based up in Southport, I think, up north of Liverpool, if I got my geography right. There was the British Bonsai Association, that was a London-based society. I've already mentioned Bonsai Kai, which is also London-based. There was the East Midlands Bonsai Society, and 1 or 2 others. At that stage, back in the really early 70s, late 60s, 70s, there was nothing in Bristol at that point. There were 1 or 2 books available. This one here by Kan Yashiroda, a well-written book, easy reading. Japanese miniature trees, bonsai Japanese miniature trees, and yeah, nice book. Then there was another one, this one here, okay, this is Bonsai, Trees and Shrubs, a guide to the methods of Kyuzo-murata, and they're translated by Lynn Perry. Now this is my Bible. If I have to recommend any bonsai book for useful information, especially with regard to the various species, this is the one. I'm referring to this one quite often, okay? And then, of course, there was this one here, which was the Master's Book of Bonsai, which is, just had some nice pictures in it. Not a great deal of information, of technical information, but a nice book with some nice coloured pictures for a change. Yeah, and Peter Adams wrote a book a bit later than these. I can't remember. He wrote several books, but I remember his very, very first one, which I had from him, little paperback. I scrounged it off him, actually. I think he expected me to buy it, but I thought, no, I think you owe it to me.
Why?
Because I gave him a lot of help. I gave him a lot of help on his nursery, you know. Yeah. But as far as what's going on these days, no chance. Minimal societies, no workshops available, no videos, no internet, no YouTube, none of these wonderful sources for information that the bonsai fraternity of today have. We didn't have that at all. England was very good in those early days because FOBS organised a number of exhibitions and conventions, and we were actually at that time ahead of any of the other European countries. So we did actually attract quite a lot of visitors from Europe to come and see, and they picked up the ideas that we had and used them and improved on them and left us behind. And you know, they produced some spectacular exhibitions and conventions in Europe, all over Europe. You know, particularly Germany was at that time a big leader in bonsai. You had Paul Lesniewicz with a huge nursery in Leiden, and then you had in Holland probably the biggest nursery in Europe. In Vleuten. Yep, I can't remember the name. I should know. Sorry, age thing. But the Germans were very, very good. But of course, eventually it was the Italians and the Spanish who produced some spectacular bonsai artists, who again had spectacular material to work with, that produced some really fabulous trees.
And what sort of time are we talking about here? Would this have been the 90s now or earlier?
Yeah, we're well into that now. Yes, we will be into the 90s now, plus. And this is an ongoing thing, very much even so to this date. In fact, I'll go so far as saying that because we are in Europe, which includes Britain, in spite of Brexit, we have such a richness of available wild material that I can remember Kimura-san, who was probably one of Japan's leading bonsai masters, said to me when I was in Switzerland, that if he could get a container of our European material trees back into Japan, which of course was impossible because of the restrictions, but if he could, he'd never have to work again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. When did the international workshops start happening? You know, the British going abroad to America and to Europe and Japan, and vice versa. Visitors coming over. I mean, I seem to remember John Narker coming over quite early on. When did all that start happening, and how did that start happening?
Well, John Narker was invited over back in the 80s. I think it was in 1983. He was 72 at the time. John Narker was 24 years older than me. We're both tigers in the Chinese calendar. So yeah, John Narker came over then, and he demonstrated in 4 cities. He demonstrated in Bristol, one up in Scotland, one in Manchester, and one in London. Okay, and these were real eye-openers for us. You know, people were encouraging him. A guy called Craig Cousins from Scotland, a tremendous character, very flamboyant chappie, great friend of mine, really pressured John to demonstrate, how to carve shari. Shari is the dead wood on bonsai trunks, okay? How to carve, removing the bark, etc., and carving the trunk to sort of suggest dead wood with a chainsaw. Poor old John had never done this, but John being John, he pretended he had and went and played ball with all of this, and it was tough. I can remember assisting John at a couple of his demonstrations. Certainly the one when he demonstrated here in Bristol, I assisted him at that. It was terrible, cigarette in one hand, working on the other hand, and a pint of beer. Absolutely unheard of these days. The familiarity really bred contempt in those days. But good old John took everything in his stride. An absolutely lovely, lovely man. Sadly passed on several years ago. But yeah, he was one from overseas. We did then get some others like Piers Notter and I think Walter Paul from Germany, some of the Italians and others that would come to these conventions, and likewise we would go to one or two of the organised conventions in Europe. It was fun. It was actually after John Nark's first visit over here in the 80s that I was very kindly invited by him to perform in Palm Springs in California, and that was my personal introduction to the international bonsai scene, where I since did many other demos. Yeah.
What were the techniques that we know and use nowadays all known about back then, or have the British and perhaps yourself been instrumental in pushing boundaries and developing techniques that are now sort of commonplace?
Well, there are sort of standard tools, bonsai tools, that one would use for different things, okay? For pruning purposes, for digging purposes to trees out. And then of course you had your wire, etc., for wiring branches so that you could manipulate them into the positions that you wanted, etc. There were one or two things that evolved. I must confess that I was once playing around with a branch, quite a hefty branch, that I had done a lot of carving on. And sometimes when you do this scratching back, you get a lot of whiskers, swarf stuff on the branch, and I thought, oh God, the only way to get rid of this. So I had this little blow torch, the sort of things that caterers use when they're decorating cakes and things. And I started burning the stuff off. I was holding this branch and burning this, then all of a sudden I felt the branch weaken a bit. I thought, hey, this is bendable. I thought, I could use this. And the technique was then born for heat bending. And it's amazing. You can manipulate branches into all sorts of positions, freshly prepared branches, not hard deadwood branches, but fresh ones. And it's spectacular. And now people all over the world are doing this. And if anybody actually did it before me, please make yourself known. Please make yourself known.
What are the most noticeable changes that you've seen over the years in bonsai?
I suppose, well, coming back to the question you just asked, I suppose in some respects it was the use of mechanical tools, electric tools, carving tools. One was using die grinders and reciprocating chisels and all that kind of stuff. None of this was heard of when I started bonsai. It just didn't exist. But yeah, and I think there's a guy in America, Dan Robinson, who was the first person to actually use the chainsaw for carving. And in fact, when that demonstration that I was telling you about, that John Nalker invited me to in Palm Springs, I had a ginormous, huge Californian juniper, and Dan passed me a chainsaw from, to use. And it was great. It certainly made life a lot easier. Also, a Makita die grinder. Yeah, but anyway, that's another story.
Somebody comes into bonsai now,
Yes.
and they just start pruning a tree. What things have happened in the past to have got to this stage now that nobody would ever know unless they know? And you've lived it, so you will know some of this stuff.
Well, it's this evolution that has just happened naturally, a lot of trial and error. I mean, for instance, the thing I just mentioned about the heat bending of a branch, nobody would have known about that until it happened, and it only happened by accident for me. And, these sorts of things occurred. And people were bringing in different types of, for instance, they were preparing branches that needed, heavy branches that needed bending, etc. They were preparing them with electrician's tape, self-adhesive tape, etc., and things like that to stop the wire that you put around the branch biting into the branch. And all this kind of stuff was evolving. So lots of little things, I can't name them all, Julian, now, but a lot of these things were happening, all part of the evolution of bonsai. But it has become very, very sophisticated now, and we do have some blooming good guys. That is the biggest surprise. In my day, there was Peter Adams and myself, Harry Tomlinson, and a guy called Dave Joyce, and we were referred to as the Gang of Four, and we were sort of looked upon as the guys that knew it, all right? And, well, Dave Joyce, a year or two later, sort of bowed out, so there's just me, Harry, and Peter Adams. But both Peter and I had art training, we both attended art college as students here, so we did have that, and that was very, very beneficial. And Harry Tomlinson, I'm not sure what his profession was. I think he once referred to himself as a white-collar worker. I think he was a cartographer, but I'm not 100% sure. But we were the guys that, so say, everybody looked up to for information on bonsai. And I know Peter Adams once said to me, I'll answer any question that anybody asks me. Whether I know the answer or not, I'll still answer the question. They were great guys. We had such great fun in those days. It was really fabulous. But having said that, and this is the thing that has been the big surprise for me, is whilst we were the so-say notables, okay, the mandarins of bonsai, these days, there's the emergence of bonsai artists, particularly in this country, is amazing. There's some fantastic guys, and on the European front, there's dozens, scores, and they're really pie-hot people. They're really, really good, and I think the Japanese are now beginning to open their eyes, and I honestly think it won't be very, very long before we will, if not have caught up with them, overtaken them, because our material trees are so good. And the one big difference between Western bonsai, European Western bonsai, and Oriental or Japanese bonsai, so much of Japan is concerned with conformity. You conform. It's almost like every grain of rice on a piece of sushi has to be in the right place. The Japanese would say, we do it this is how we do it. It's all we. In this country and in the rest of the Western hemisphere, it's look at what I can do. It's all me, I. It's the individual expressing himself, herself, whereas the Japanese don't like to do that. They like to follow. You get a few guys that will stand out, Kobayashi-san, Kimura-san, and others, these great gods of bonsai today, the contemporary Japanese, who are spectacular, and there's loads of them, but but the rest of the run-of-the-mill will all conform and do what they're told. That exists to some extent within club environments, but even then, people are stubborn in the West. They want to do their own thing, and you can get workshops and things where people are trying to teach. The sorts of bonsai informed person will try to help the rest of at the workshop. No. This is how I want to do it, really.
So when you guys started off back in the 60s and 70s, and you were presumably looking to Japan for inspiration and knowledge and through the books and things, were you more likely to conform in those days while you were learning the way that they did it in Japan, and from that have grown?
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. When you were styling a tree, okay, trees have been subdivided into a number of different shapes, forms, referred to as styles, and you have your prime order of 5, okay, which is the formal upright, the informal upright, slanting style, okay, semi-cascade and cascade, okay, and then you get all manner of variations on that. And invariably these will have been derived from observed nature, okay, and there's about 24 different styles. And invariably when the Japanese would teach you bonsai, first of all they would ask you, where's the front of the tree? Okay, you have to establish the front of the tree. Well, okay, well, never mind what I think about that, but that's the way. And then you have your first branch, your second branch, your third branch, your back branch, your bullshit branch, etc., 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 okay? And from the teaching point of view, that is a very good instructional way of actually getting over the information to structure a tree. So you prune out all the irrelevant branches. Hopefully you've got material in the first place that will provide you with those first branch, second branch, third branch, etc. branch. And once you've wired them and positioned them, you will guarantee to get a result. You'll get an acceptable starting day one bonsai, okay? And that was John Larker's thing. He always taught in that way. Very, very rarely would he, on an individual basis, on a one-to-one basis, he might do some advanced work. But when addressing any convention group, I should say, or workshop, it was always this first branch, second branch, da-da-da-da branch, okay? And that was very Japanese. And yes, we adhered to that kind of thing religiously to begin with, and one or two variations, because each of the other styles had their own little sets of rules, okay? And you stuck with them. And then you got clever dicks would say, rules are to be broken, okay? And then you get somebody else. I can remember one guy, it was Dan Robinson. It was Dan Robinson at one of the conventions, and he picked up. He says, "Here's my set of rules, okay, bonsai rules," and he turned the paper around, and it was a blank. There are no rules. Okay, he's a nice guy, Dan. I was demonstrated with him in Monaco once. We had a great time with Prince Rainier.
We'll have to talk about some of your foreign experiences at some point, because I'm sure you have many memories and many stories to share. For now, I just want to wind up. Thank you for this, but I just want to wind up by asking you, if we invite people to leave messages below with any questions or subjects about the history of British bonsai that you can answer in a future video, are you happy to do that? Assuming you know the answers, of course.
Yeah, I can try. I can't guarantee. Like I said, age isn't being overly kind to my memory bank, and things are getting a little bit foggy now as time passes, but I will certainly be happy to help in that respect.
Right,
I
well,
possibly can.
let's see if we can get some questions in then while we still have a chance.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure. It's been great. All right. And by the way, guys, don't forget to press the like button and the share button, and you know what?
That's what we like. Always a hustler, hey?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.